That night, a single text erased the Christmas I had spent a whole year planning. My family thought they were holding all the cards when they told me not to come if I would not babysit 4 kids, but they did not realize that with one reply, their entire vacation and my $50,000 vanished. That year, 1,000 miles away in the snow. I finally learned who my real family actually was. My name is Amelia Wolfe, and I was standing in the center of my compact apartment in Minneapolis, the smell of Scotch tape and pine-scented wrapping paper filling the air. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of deep, frozen winter evening where the cold radiates off the glass of the windows despite the heating running full blast. I was 32 years old, holding a partially wrapped box containing a limited edition robot coding kit for my nephew, when the vibration of my phone against the hardwood table shattered the silence. It was a sharp, aggressive buzz. The screen lit up, cutting through the dim ambition of the fairy lights I had strung up around the living room. The notification displayed a message from the group chat titled, "Family Heart Emoji." The sender was Madison. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. Madison, my older sister, was not known for her subtlety, but even for her, the message was stark. There were no emojis to soften the blow, no "hey sis" or "just wondering." It was a single, grammatically perfect sentence that sat there like a barricade. "If you are not going to babysit 4 kids, then don't even come." I stared at the words. I blinked, expecting them to rearrange themselves into a joke, but they remained rigid. Before I could even process the sudden escalation, the bubbles indicating someone else was typing appeared. It was my mother. "Your sister is right, Amelia." Then my father, a man who usually avoided group chats unless he was sending blurry photos of his lawn, chimed in immediately after. "Christmas is for helping family. Do not make this difficult again." My lungs simply stopped working. It was not a gasp. It was a total cessation of breath for exactly 3 seconds. The sensation was not purely shock. It was the physical manifestation of a realization I had been dodging for decades. The air in the room felt suddenly thin, sucked out by the gravity of their demand. They were not asking me. They were not negotiating. They were telling me my price of admission. I looked up from the glowing screen, my eyes scanning my apartment. It was a staging ground for a holiday I had single-handedly engineered. Near the door stood 2 large suitcases, packed with thermal layers and cashmere sweaters. Beside them was a stack of carefully curated gifts, chosen not just for the 4 children, but for Madison, her husband, and my parents. I had spent weeks researching, ordering, and wrapping. But the biggest item wasn't in the room. It was sitting in my email inbox, marked with a star. It was the confirmation for the Timberline Lodge, a massive luxury cabin located on a frozen lake in northern Wisconsin. I had booked the entire property. I had paid the deposit and the final balance. I had arranged the grocery delivery. I had booked the private snowmobile tour. I had done it all because I wanted, just once, to have a Christmas that looked like the movies, not the chaotic, stressful mess it usually was. And they had no idea. I work as a senior systems engineer for Brightline Nexus, a tech firm that manages back-end infrastructure for massive data centers. My job, in essence, is to predict when a system is about to crash and patch it, before the users even know there was a glitch. I am the one who wakes up at 3 a.m. when a server in Singapore overheats. I am the one who reroutes the traffic, extinguishes the digital fires, and ensures that everyone else can keep scrolling through their feeds without interruption. I realized, standing there in the blue light of my apartment, that I had simply transferred my job description to my family life. I was the fail-safe. I was the redundant backup system. The electric heater clicked and hummed, a lonely sound in the quiet room. Outside, the lights of Minneapolis blurred through the frost on the window pane, but my focus was entirely on the illuminated text. "Don't even come." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A dozen angry responses flared in my mind. I wanted to scream about the cabin. I wanted to tell them about the $5,000 I had dropped on the rental alone. I wanted to list every diaper I had changed and every dish I had washed since I was 12. But I stopped. The anger that had spiked in my chest suddenly cooled, hardening into something brittle and sharp. If I screamed, I was just being emotional, Amelia. If I argued, I was being difficult, Amelia. I needed to be precise. I needed to be absolutely sure that I understood the terms of this contract they were forcing me to sign. I typed slowly, my thumbs hitting the glass with deliberate force. Just to be clear, I wrote, ensuring my tone was neutral. You are saying that if I do not spend the holiday watching the 4 children, I am not allowed to attend Christmas. Is that correct? I watched the 3 dots dance. Madison did not hesitate. Correct, she replied. We don't need someone who just eats and leaves. The sentence hit me with the force of a physical slap. Eats and leaves. As if I were a stray dog they let in for scraps. As if I hadn't spent the last 10 years cooking the meals they ate. As if I hadn't bought the wine they drank. As if my presence was a debit on their ledger, and my labor was the only currency they accepted. I placed the phone face down on the table. The screen went dark, but the words were burned into my retinas. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a heavy thudding rhythm. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep inhale, smelling the pine needles and the faint metallic tang of the tape dispenser. They thought they had cornered me. They thought the threat of exclusion would bring me to my knees, begging for the privilege of serving them. They thought I was afraid of being alone. I opened my eyes and looked at the reflection of myself in the darkened window. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like someone who had just been handed the keys to her own freedom. I did not reply immediately. That silence, that long stretch of minutes where they likely sat smugly waiting for my apology, was not hesitation. It was the time I took to formulate the single text message that would dismantle their entire holiday. You have to understand that I was not born into this role. I was groomed for it. It started in the suburbs of a small town in Ohio, in a house with beige siding and a driveway that was always slightly too small for all our cars. Madison was 3 years older than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was the protagonist of the family narrative. I was the supporting character, the stagehand, the extra who filled out the background. It wasn't malicious, at least not at first. It was just the physics of our household. Madison had gravity. I had orbit. I remember sitting at the kitchen table when I was 8 years old. Madison was 11. She had forgotten her geography project, a papier-mâché globe that we had all spent the weekend helping her build. She had left it right there on the counter. "Oh, poor Maddie," my mother had said, grabbing her car keys. "She is going to be so upset. I better run this up to the school." 2 weeks later, I left my math workbook on the same counter. When I came home, tears in my eyes because I had lost points for not turning it in. My mother looked up from her magazine and sighed. "Amelia, you know better," she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "You are usually so responsible. Why were you so careless? You need to learn to manage your own things." That was the pattern. Madison's mistakes were emergencies that required family intervention. My mistakes were character flaws that required a lesson in independence. It wasn't just attention, it was resources. When Madison wanted to go on the senior class trip to Florida, my parents laughed and scrambled, cutting corners on the grocery budget to make it happen. "It is a once-in-a-lifetime memory," my father had said, beaming as he handed her the check. 3 years later, when I asked for $40 to buy a set of advanced coding textbooks I needed for an extracurricular club, my father frowned. "Amelia, you are a smart girl," he said, patting my shoulder. "That is what the public library is for. We need to be careful with money right now." I walked 2 miles to the library every Tuesday. I learned to code on a public computer that froze if you typed too fast. I didn't resent them then. I just thought that was how the world worked. I thought being the low-maintenance child was a badge of honor. I didn't realize it was a label that meant neglectable. The dynamic solidified into concrete when Madison had her first son. The moment that baby was born, Madison ascended to sainthood. The mother. It was a title that apparently came with a lifetime exemption from manual labor. "Amelia, hold the baby while I eat," Amelia, just watch him for an hour while we nap. Amelia, you don't mind changing him, do you? You are so good with him. It was a slow creep. One baby became 2, then 3, then 4. The village that everyone talks about raising a child. In our family, the village was just me. I thought about the Christmas 2 years ago. I had flown in from Minneapolis, exhausted from a 70-hour work week. I arrived to find the house in chaos. Within 10 minutes of walking through the door, my mother handed me an apron. "Thank goodness you are here," she said. "The turkey needs to go in, and Madison is trying to get the kids dressed for photos." I spent the next 6 hours in the kitchen. I peeled 5 pounds of potatoes. I basted the bird. I washed every pot and pan. From the living room, I could hear the laughter. I could hear the pop of champagne corks. Madison and her husband were posing for Instagram photos by the tree, holding their perfectly dressed children. When dinner was served, I sat down last. My food was lukewarm. "Great stuffing. Amelia," my brother-in-law said, his mouth full. That was it. That was the payment. Later that night came the gift exchange. I had bought Madison a designer handbag she had been hinting at for months. I had bought my parents a new smart TV. I watched them tear open the paper, gasping, hugging me, telling me I shouldn't have spent so much. Then, Madison handed me a small, soft package. "I saw this and thought of you," she said. I opened it. It was a scarf. Not cashmere, not wool. It was a thin, scratchy acrylic loop scarf in a neon orange color that I would never wear. The price tag had been hastily ripped off, but I recognized the brand from the discount bin at the local drugstore. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile. "It is great for walking to work," she said dismissively, turning back to play with her new bag. There was no violence in my childhood. No one hit me. No one starved me. But there is a specific kind of pain in being invisible while standing in the center of a room. I was the good one, the independent one, the one who didn't need anything. They weaponized compliments. "You are so strong," meant, "We don't need to help you." "You are so career-focused," meant, "You don't have a real family to worry about." Back in my apartment, staring at the darkened phone, I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. My mother's earlier text echoed in my head. "You are the only one who is free." Free. They thought because I didn't have a husband or children, my time had zero value. They didn't know about the nights I slept under my desk to meet a deadline. They didn't know I managed a budget at Brightline Nexus that was larger than the GDP of a small country. They didn't know I had just negotiated a bonus that could pay off their mortgage. They didn't know me. They only knew the utility I provided. I looked at the text from Madison again. "We don't need someone who just eats and leaves." I had been trained like a service dog to fetch happiness for them and lay it at their feet, hoping for a pat on the head. I had spent 32 years believing that if I just carried enough of the load, if I just fixed enough of their problems, eventually they would look at me and see a person. But tonight, looking at the snow falling silently over the city, I realized the truth. You cannot earn love from people who only view you as an employee. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up again. I was not the fixer anymore. I was about to become the glitch that crashed their entire system. To understand why a simple text message could feel like a declaration of war. You have to understand that I was not born into this role. I was groomed for it. It started in the suburbs of a small town in Ohio, in a house with beige siding and a driveway that was always slightly too small for all our cars. Madison was 3 years older than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was the protagonist of the family narrative. I was the supporting character, the stagehand, the extra who filled out the background. It was not malicious, at least not at first. It was just the physics of our household. Madison had gravity. I had orbit. I remember sitting at the kitchen table when I was 8 years old. Madison was 11. She had forgotten her geography project, a papier-mâché globe that we had all spent the weekend helping her build. She had left it right there on the counter. "Oh, poor Maddie," my mother had said, grabbing her car keys. "She's going to be so upset. I better run this up to the school." 2 weeks later, I left my math workbook on the same counter. When I came home, tears in my eyes because I had lost points for not turning it in, my mother looked up from her magazine and sighed. "Amelia, you know better," she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "You are usually so responsible. Why were you so careless? You need to learn to manage your own things." That was the pattern. Madison's mistakes were emergencies that required family intervention. My mistakes were character flaws that required a lesson in independence. It was not just attention, it was resources. When Madison wanted to go on the senior class trip to Florida, my parents laughed and scrambled, cutting corners on the grocery budget to make it happen. "It is a once-in-a-lifetime memory," my father had said, beaming as he handed her the check. 3 years later, when I asked for $40 to buy a set of advanced coding textbooks I needed for an extracurricular club, my father frowned. "Amelia, you are a smart girl," he said, patting my shoulder. "That is what the public library is for. We need to be careful with money right now." I walked 2 miles to the library every Tuesday. I learned to code on a public computer that froze if you typed too fast. I didn't resent them then. I just thought that was how the world worked. I thought being the low-maintenance child was a badge of honor. I didn't realize it was a label that meant neglectable. The dynamic solidified into concrete when Madison had her first son. The moment that baby was born, Madison ascended to sainthood. The mother. It was a title that apparently came with a lifetime exemption from manual labor. "Amelia, hold the baby while I eat." "Amelia, just watch him for an hour while we nap." "Amelia, you don't mind changing him, do you? You are so good with him." It was a slow creep. 1 baby became 2, then 3, then 4. The village that everyone talks about raising a child. In our family, the village was just me. I thought about the Christmas 2 years ago. I had flown in from Minneapolis, exhausted from a 70-hour work week. I arrived to find the house in chaos. Within 10 minutes of walking through the door, my mother handed me an apron. "Thank goodness you are here," she said. "The turkey needs to go in, and Madison is trying to get the kids dressed for photos." I spent the next 6 hours in the kitchen. I peeled 5 pounds of potatoes. I basted the bird. I washed every pot and pan. From the living room, I could hear the laughter. I could hear the pop of champagne corks. Madison and her husband were posing for Instagram photos by the tree, holding their perfectly dressed children. When dinner was served, I sat down last. My food was lukewarm. "Great stuffing, Amelia," my brother-in-law said, his mouth full. That was it. That was the payment. Later that night came the gift exchange. I had bought Madison a designer handbag she had been hinting at for months. I had bought my parents a new smart TV. I watched them tear open the paper, gasping, hugging me, telling me I shouldn't have spent so much. Then, Madison handed me a small, soft package. "I saw this and thought of you," she said. I opened it. It was a scarf, not cashmere, not wool. It was a thin, scratchy acrylic loop scarf in a neon orange color that I would never wear. The price tag had been hastily ripped off, but I recognized the brand from the discount bin at the local drugstore. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile. "It is great for walking to work," she said dismissively, turning back to play with her new bag. There was no violence in my childhood. No one hit me. No one starved me. But there is a specific kind of pain in being invisible while standing in the center of a room. I was the good one, the independent one, the one who didn't need anything. They weaponized compliments. "You are so strong" meant, "We don't need to help you." "You are so career-focused" meant, "You don't have a real family to worry about." Back in my apartment, staring at the darkened phone, I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. My mother's earlier text echoed in my head. "You are the only one who is free." Free? They thought because I didn't have a husband or children, my time had zero value. They didn't know about the nights I slept under my desk to meet a deadline. They didn't know I managed a budget at Brightline Nexus that was larger than the GDP of a small country. They didn't know I had just negotiated a bonus that could pay off their mortgage. They didn't know me. They only knew the utility I provided. I looked at the text from Madison again. We don't need someone who just eats and leaves. I had been trained like a service dog to fetch happiness for them and lay it at their feet, hoping for a pat on the head. I had spent 32 years believing that if I just carried enough of the load, if I just fixed enough of their problems, eventually they would look at me and see a person. But tonight, looking at the snow falling silently over the city, I realized the truth. You cannot earn love from people who only view you as an employee. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up again. I was not the fixer anymore. I was about to become the glitch that crashed their entire system. I had been taught that my value lay in how much I could carry, right up until that night, when I decided to put the burden down. The origins of this disaster began exactly 3 weeks before that fateful text message, on the day the bonus from Brightline Nexus hit my bank account. It was the culmination of Project Ether, a massive cloud migration initiative that had consumed my life for the better part of a year. For 6 months, I had essentially lived on caffeine and vending machine sandwiches, sleeping in 4-hour intervals and staring at lines of code until my vision blurred. I had missed birthdays. I had missed happy hours. I had missed dates. But when the project launched without a single second of downtime, the company rewarded me. The number that appeared on my direct deposit notification was staggering. It was more money than my father had made in 3 years at the auto plant. It was enough for a down payment on a house, or a luxury car, or a prudent investment portfolio. But I did not want a house. I did not want a portfolio. I wanted a family. I sat in my office chair, vibrating with a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline, and I decided right then that I was going to fix us. I was going to use this money to purchase the one thing that had always eluded me. A Christmas where everyone was happy, where no one was stressed, and where I was finally just a daughter and a sister. Not a utility. I spent the next 48 hours curating the perfect holiday. This was not going to be a cramped gathering in my parents' aging living room with the drafty windows. I went online and found the Timberline Lodge in northern Wisconsin. It was breathtaking. The listing photos showed a sprawling structure made of honey-colored cedar and rough-hewn stone, perched on the edge of a frozen, pristine lake surrounded by a dense forest of snow-heavy pines. It looked like the cover of a holiday magazine. It had a massive wraparound deck with a steaming hot tub that looked out over the ice. Inside, there was a great room with 30-foot ceilings and a floor-to-ceiling river rock fireplace that promised to roar with warmth against the winter chill. I obsessed over the room assignments. I booked the master suite for my parents, a room with a king-sized bed and a private soaking tub, thinking that maybe if my mother was relaxed, she would stop nitpicking. I assigned the second large suite to Madison and her husband, giving them plenty of space to retreat so they wouldn't feel crowded. For the 4 kids, I found a bunk room that looked like a fort, stocked with board games and beanbag chairs. And for myself, I chose the loft. It was a small, cozy space overlooking the great room, accessible by a spiral staircase. I had this vivid, cinematic image in my head. I imagined sitting up there in a thick wool sweater, a mug of hot cocoa in my hands, looking down as my father told stories by the fire and the kids played quietly on the rug. In this fantasy, I was not running back and forth to the kitchen. I was not wiping noses. I was observing, resting, and belonging. I clicked reserve. The deposit alone was $7,000. Then came the logistics. I knew that traveling with 4 children under the age of 8 was a nightmare, so I decided to smooth the road with money. I bought 8 round-trip tickets from Ohio to Wisconsin. I did not choose the cheapest economy options with the terrible layovers. I bought the direct flights at prime times, mid-morning so the kids would be well rested, but not so late that they would be cranky. I paid extra for seat selection to ensure everyone sat together. I added the family assistance service so an airline representative would help them navigate the terminal with the strollers and the car seats. I did not stop there. I remembered that my brother-in-law had complained last year about how boring winter vacations were, so I booked a private dog sledding tour for the whole group. I reserved a table for a candlelit dinner for my parents at the Michelin-rated restaurant near the lodge, prepaying for the tasting menu and the wine pairing, thinking it would be a nice thank you for all their years of raising us. I rented a high-end SUV with four-wheel drive and heated seats to pick us up from the airport. By the time I was finished, the total cost was hovering just over $50,000. I stared at the confirmation screen. $50,000. It was an obscene amount of money to spend on a 4-day weekend, but I told myself it was an investment. I was investing in a memory. I was buying a ceasefire. When I sent the itinerary to the family group chat, I waited for the explosion of gratitude. I waited for Madison to call me screaming with excitement. I waited for my dad to say he was proud of my success. Instead, the response was lukewarm at best. "Oh, wow," my mother texted. "That looks fancy. Make sure the heating works. Your father's knees ache in the cold." "Looks good," Madison added a few minutes later. "Did you check if the cabin is baby-proofed? The toddler is into everything right now." That was it. No one asked how much it cost. No one asked if they could contribute. No one said, "Amelia, this is insane. Thank you so much." They simply absorbed it, in their minds. This was just what Amelia did. I worked with computers. I was good at online stuff. To them, finding a luxury cabin and coordinating 8 flight paths was just a few clicks of a mouse, not a 5-figure sacrifice. They assumed, perhaps, that I had some corporate discount, or maybe they just didn't care to think about the math. To ask about the price would be to acknowledge the value, and acknowledging my value was something they had never been good at. The crack in my illusion began to widen 2 nights before the text message. When I drove over to Madison's house to drop off some high-performance thermal gear I had bought for the kids. The house was, as always, a sensory overload. The television was blaring cartoons at maximum volume. Toys were scattered across the floor like caltrops in a war zone. The air smelled of wet wipes and burnt toast. When I walked in, laden with bags of expensive snow pants and waterproof gloves, Madison didn't look up from her phone. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through social media while her youngest child smeared applesauce on the cabinet doors. "Hey," I said, setting the bags down. "I brought the gear for the trip. I wanted to make sure everything fits before we fly out." Madison glanced at the bags. "Oh, cool. Just put them on the bench." She didn't get up. She didn't look inside. "I got the North Face ones," I said, a little desperate for acknowledgement. "They are rated for 20 below zero." "Okay," she said, her tone flat. Then she looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Hey, for the flight, can you make sure you sit next to the twins? Mike and I really need a break on the plane, and they listen to you better." It wasn't a request, it was an assignment. My mother walked in from the living room then, holding a pile of laundry. She saw the bags and nodded at me. "Amelia, while you are here, can you look at the iPad? The internet is acting up again." I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the noise of a family that was supposed to be mine, and I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter weather. I had spent $50,000 to give them a dream vacation. I had bought them warmth and luxury. I had paved the way for the most magical Christmas of our lives. But as I looked at Madison ignoring the gifts and my mother handing me a broken tablet, I realized something devastating. They didn't see the cabin. They didn't see the lake or the dog sleds or the wine dinners. They just saw a bigger, prettier stage where I could continue to serve them. I fixed the iPad. I organized the snow gear. I let the twins climb on me for 20 minutes while Madison finished her coffee. I played my part perfectly, smiling and nodding, while the knot in my stomach tightened. I drove home that night in silence. I tried to tell myself I was being sensitive. I tried to tell myself that this was just how families were. Messy, ungrateful, chaotic. I told myself that once we got to the cabin, once the fire was lit and the snow was falling, the magic would happen. They would see me then. I was delusional. I thought I was buying a memory. I thought I was purchasing their affection, or at least their respect. But as I merged onto the highway, the city lights blurring past me, the truth was already whispering in the back of my mind. I was not the producer of this show. I was not the director. I was just the financier, the silent backer who paid for the theater, bought the costumes, and built the sets. only to be told to stand in the wings and hold the curtain while the real stars took the bow. And even then, I still planned to go. I still planned to get on that plane. It took the text message 2 nights later to finally make me realize that no amount of money can buy a seat at a table where you are only welcome as a waiter. If the text message I received in my apartment was the explosion that leveled the building, the evening I spent at Madison's house a few days prior was the sound of the structural beams groaning under the weight. It was the warning sign that I chose to ignore because I was too busy hanging decorations on a condemnation notice. I arrived at Madison's house just after 6 in the evening. The drive from Minneapolis usually took me about 40 minutes, but with the holiday traffic and the slush piling up on the interstate, it had taken nearly 90 minutes. My back was aching, my eyes were burning from staring at brake lights, and I was mentally exhausted from a full day of putting out fires at Brightline Nexus. But as I parked my car in their overcrowded driveway, blocking in my brother-in-law's truck because there was literally nowhere else to put my vehicle, I took a deep breath. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, forced a smile onto my face, and told myself that the stress would melt away the moment I saw my family. I walked up the front steps, balancing a stack of wrapped gifts and a tray of homemade peppermint bark I had stayed up until 2 in the morning baking. I did not have a free hand to ring the doorbell, so I awkwardly bumped my hip against the wood until the latch clicked. The door swung open, but nobody was there to greet me. The door had simply been unlocked, or perhaps left slightly ajar by a child. Walking into Madison's house was like walking into the inside of a pinball machine that had been kicked by a frustrated teenager. The noise hit me first. The television in the living room was blasting a generic Christmas movie at a volume that made my teeth vibrate. Somewhere upstairs, a dog was barking rhythmically, and on the ground level, the sound of 4 children sprinting in circles on the hardwood floor created a thundering, chaotic bass line. "I am here!" I called out, trying to make my voice cheerful over the din. I took 2 steps into the foyer and immediately stepped on a plastic dinosaur. The sharp pain shot up my leg, but I managed to keep my balance and the peppermint bark. "Watch out," Madison said. She appeared from the hallway leading to the kitchen. She looked like she had been fighting a losing battle with a tornado. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that was slowly unraveling, and there was a suspicious stain on the shoulder of her oversized sweater. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my drive was. She did not offer to take the heavy tray of cookies from my hands. Instead, she thrust a toddler at me. It was Leo, her youngest. He was 2 years old, wearing only a diaper and a t-shirt, and his hands were coated in a thick, brown substance that smelled like melted chocolate and saliva. "Here," Madison said, breathless. "Just hold him for a second. I have to get the lasagna out of the oven before it burns, and he keeps trying to climb into the dishwasher." She deposited the sticky, squirming child onto my hip before I had even put my purse down. "Hi, Leo," I said, grimacing slightly as his chocolate-covered hand immediately grabbed a fistful of my clean wool coat. "It is good to see you too, buddy." Madison was already halfway to the kitchen. "Don't let him touch the walls," she shouted over her shoulder. I sighed, kicked off my boots without using my hands, and walked into the living room, still holding the tray of cookies in one hand and a 40-pound toddler in the other. The living room was a warm, cluttered explosion of holiday cheer. The tree was up, buried under so many ornaments that you could barely see the green needles. My mother was sitting on the plush beige sofa, looking perfectly comfortable. She was wearing a festive red cardigan with reindeer on it, her feet propped up on the ottoman. She held a mug of tea in both hands, watching the chaos with a serene, detached expression. "Hi, Mom," I said, shifting Leo's weight. My mother looked up and smiled. "Oh, Amelia, you made it. Good." She took a sip of her tea and frowned slightly. "Since you are up," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen with her mug. "Could you grab the kettle? This water has gone tepid, and I really wanted a fresh cup with the cookies." I stared at her. I was wearing a heavy winter coat. I was holding a child. I was holding a tray of food. I had not even fully entered the room. "Sure, Mom," I said, my voice tight. "Let me just put everything down first." "Thanks, sweetie," she said, turning her attention back to the television. Oh, and check if there is any honey left. Your father used the last of it this morning. I walked to the kitchen, peeling Leo off my coat and setting him down in his high chair. My father was standing at the island, staring at a pile of mail. He didn't look up when I entered. "Hey, Dad," I said. "Hey, kid," he grunted, ripping open an envelope. "While you are in here, take a look at the disposal. It is making that grinding noise again. I think Madison dropped a spoon down there." I stood in the center of the kitchen. I had been in the house for less than 5 minutes. I had not taken off my coat. I had not been offered a drink. I had not been hugged. I had been handed a child, ordered to make tea, and assigned a plumbing repair. "I will look at it in a minute," I said, pouring hot water into my mother's mug. "Did you guys get the email I sent yesterday? The one with the final itinerary for the lodge?" I tried to keep my tone light, excited. I wanted them to ask about the cabin. I wanted to talk about the stone fireplace or the view of the lake. I wanted someone to acknowledge the massive spreadsheet of logistics I had managed to pull off. Madison was bent over the oven, wrestling a tray of lasagna. "What email?" she asked, grunting as she heaved the dish onto the counter. "The one with the photos," I said, "and the room assignments. I put you and Mike in the suite with the jacuzzi tub." "Oh," Madison said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Yeah, I saw something come through. I haven't opened it yet. It has been a madhouse here. I figured you handled it." "I did handle it," I said, "but I thought you might want to see where we are staying. It is really beautiful. Maddie, it has a loft." "I trust you," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You are good at that stuff. Did you remember to request the crib for Leo? Because if he has to sleep in a regular bed, nobody is sleeping." "Yes," I said. "I requested the crib, and a high chair, and a baby gate for the stairs." "Great," she said, turning her back to me to chop parsley. "Can you grab the milk from the fridge? The boys are screaming for drinks." I felt a small, cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just that they were busy. It was the complete lack of curiosity. If someone told me they had booked a $50,000 vacation for me, I would want to see every pixel of the photos. I would be studying the floor plan. I would be asking questions. Their lack of interest implied something painful. They didn't care about the destination. They only cared that the service was provided. Just then, the stampede arrived. The twins, Noah and Ethan, came skidding into the kitchen in their socks, followed closely by their older sister, Sophie. When they saw me, their faces lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. "Auntie Mills!" Sophie screamed. They slammed into my legs, hugging me with the ferocity that only children possess. This was the trap. This was the hook that kept me on the line. "Did you bring the presents?" Noah asked, looking up at me with wide eyes. "I did," I smiled, ruffling his hair. "But you can't open them until we get to the cabin." "Is there snow at the cabin?" Ethan asked. "Lots of snow," I promised, "and I booked a dog sled team. Real huskies are going to pull us across the lake." The kids gasped in unison. "Real dogs?" Sophie whispered, as if I had just promised them a unicorn. "Real dogs," I confirmed. For a moment, standing there surrounded by their excitement, I felt the warmth return. This was why I did it. I did it for them. They didn't know about money. They didn't know about power dynamics. They just knew that Auntie Mills made magic happen. Okay, let go of your aunt," Madison said, shooing them away. "Go wash your hands. Dinner is in 5 minutes. Amelia, can you cut the salad? The knife is in the block." The moment was over. I was demoted from magician back to sous chef. I took off my coat, finally, and washed my hands. I stood at the counter, slicing cucumbers, listening to the drone of the television in the other room and the screaming of the kids upstairs. Mike, my brother-in-law, walked in a few minutes later. He looked tired, wearing his work boots and a flannel shirt. He gave me a nod. "Hey, Amelia, thanks for coming over." "No problem," I said. He walked over to Madison, who was stirring sauce at the stove. I was standing just a few feet away. near the pantry door, grabbing the croutons. They must have thought I had walked out of the room, or maybe they just didn't care if I heard. Mike lowered his voice, leaning in to kiss Madison on the cheek. Man, I am beat. I don't know how we are going to survive a flight with these monsters. It will be fine, Madison whispered back. Amelia booked the direct flight, and she is sitting with the twins. Thank God, Mike muttered. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and cracked it open. I still can't believe we are doing this. If we had to pay for this trip, we would be eating ramen for the next 3 years. I know, Madison murmured, her voice dropping even lower. But hey, she needs something to spend that money on, right? It is not like she has anyone else to spoil. We are doing her a favor. Really, giving her a family Christmas. I froze. My hand tightened around the bag of croutons, crushing a handful of them into dust. We are doing her a favor. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They didn't see my gift as generosity. They saw it as a transaction where I was the one benefiting. In their twisted logic, they were the charitable ones. They were donating their presents, their children, their familyness to the lonely spinster aunt who had nothing but a career and a bank account. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the back of Madison's head. I wanted to throw the salad bowl on the floor. I wanted to scream that I had a life, that I had friends, that I was respected in my field, that I was a complete person without them. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, forced my shoulders to relax, and walked back to the counter with the croutons. Dinner looks great, I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears, like it was coming from a tin can. Madison didn't turn around. Thanks. Put it on the table, will you? I carried the salad to the dining room. I set the table. I poured the drinks. I cut the lasagna for the kids. I wiped up spilled milk. I listened to my father complain about the government and my mother complain about her neighbors. I sat there, eating the food I had helped prepare, in the house I had helped clean, planning the vacation I had fully funded. I looked at their faces. They were chewing, talking, laughing, completely oblivious to the person sitting right there who made it all possible. I saw the picture clearly. It was a high-definition snapshot of my reality. I was the insurance policy. I was the wallet. I was the staff. But as I looked at Sophie laughing at a joke I made, and Leo falling asleep with his head on my shoulder, I did what I always did. I picked up a mental paintbrush and covered over the ugly truth with a fresh coat of holiday red and green. It will be different at the cabin, I told myself, ignoring the tightening in my chest. Once we are there, they will understand. Once we are there, they will be grateful. I was seeing the iceberg dead ahead, and instead of turning the ship, I was just rearranging the deck chairs and telling myself the view was lovely. The timeline snapped back to the present, to that Tuesday night in my Minneapolis apartment. I was sitting on my sofa, the unfinished wrapping paper crinkling under my thigh. My laptop was still open on the coffee table, the screen glowing with the spreadsheet I had made for the trip, color-coded columns for flight times, dietary restrictions, and activity slots. The room was bathed in the warm, artificial yellow of the fairy lights, a stark contrast to the blue-white glare of the phone screen in my hand. The vibration of the device felt like a physical intrusion, a drill pressing against my palm. The group chat, titled Family Heart Emoji, was usually a dormant place where my mother posted inspirational quotes or my father asked how to forward an email. Tonight, however, it was a firing squad. Madison had fired the opening shot with her ultimatum. If you are not going to babysit 4 kids, then don't even come. I had barely finished processing the shape of those letters when the reinforcements arrived. My mother's message appeared next. Your sister is right. Amelia, you are the one with the most free time. Who else is supposed to watch them while the adults relax? It is just common sense. The adults. I stared at the words, feeling a strange, detached numbness spreading through my fingertips. I was 32 years old. I managed a team of 15 engineers. I owned my own car. I paid my own rent. I had just bankrolled a luxury vacation that cost more than my mother's annual pension. Yet, In her eyes, I was still sitting at the kids' table. I was not an adult. I was the help. Free time was their code for life without value. Because I did not have a husband to cook for or children to shuttle to soccer practice, my time was considered a public resource, free for the taking. Then came my father. He did not text often, so his participation carried the weight of a gavel banging on a judge's desk. Amelia, stop causing drama. Christmas is about sacrifice. It is about doing things for family. Don't make everything so complicated just because you want attention. Sacrifice. That was the word that did it. That was the word that snapped the last fraying thread of my emotional attachment. For 30 years, I had accepted sacrifice as my definition of love. I thought sacrifice was a two-way street, a currency you exchanged. I sacrifice for you. You respect me. I help you. You value me, gare. But reading those messages in rapid succession, seeing the united front they had formed against me, I realized that for the Wolf family, sacrifice was a one-way tribute. I was a colony, and they were the empire. They expected my resources, my labor, and my obedience, and in return, they offered me the privilege of not being exiled. I did not feel the hot flush of anger I usually felt when we argued. There were no tears pricking my eyes. Instead, a profound, icy clarity settled over me. It felt like the air conditioning in a server room. Sterile, cold, and efficient. My heart rate actually slowed down. I looked at the cursor blinking in the text box. I could have typed a paragraph. I could have reminded them that I paid for the cabin. I could have listed the hours I spent booking the flights. I could have screamed in all caps. But screaming is what children do, and I was done being the child. I needed them to say it. I needed to see the terms of our relationship written out in black and white, with no room for backtracking later. I needed a screenshot that would serve as the death certificate for my role as the doormat. I typed carefully, my thumbs moving with deliberate precision. Just to be clear, I wrote, ensuring every word was neutral. You are saying that if I do not spend the holiday watching the 4 children, I am not allowed to attend Christmas. Is that correct? I watched the 3 little dots bounce on the screen. Madison was typing. Then she stopped. Then she typed again. The response came through, stripping away every layer of pretense. Correct. We don't need someone who just eats and leaves. Eats and leaves. The insult hung there, glowing on the OLED screen. It was a magnificent thing, really. It was so cruel, so lacking in self-awareness, that it was almost art. Eats and leaves implied that I was a consumer of their resources. It implied that I brought nothing to the table. It completely erased the $50,000, the labor, the gifts, and the years of emotional support. To them, my presence was a cost they were unwilling to bear unless I subsidized it with childcare services. I did not reply. I placed the phone face down on the coffee table, directly on top of a coaster. I heard the faint click of the case hitting the cork. Then I just sat there. For 10 full minutes, I did not move. The silence in the apartment was heavy, but it was no longer lonely. It was the silence of a courtroom before the verdict is read. I listened to the electric heater ticking as it expanded in the corner. I heard the distant wail of a siren somewhere in downtown Minneapolis. I looked out the window at the snow swirling in the streetlights. It was falling thick and fast, a true Midwestern blizzard. In those 10 minutes, my mind did not go where it usually went. I did not spiral into guilt. I did not wonder if I was being selfish. I did not think, maybe I should just do it to keep the peace. Instead, my mind went to the Brightline Nexus dashboard. When a client refuses to pay their invoice, we do not argue with them. We do not beg them to see our value. We simply cut off access to the service. We revoke the API keys. We shut down the servers. I looked at the pile of gifts in the corner. I looked at the confirmation email for the Timberline Lodge printed out on the table. They thought they were negotiating with a desperate sister who was terrified of spending Christmas alone. They thought they held the ultimate leverage: inclusion. They believed that the fear of being left out in the cold would force me to bend the knee, just like it always had. But they had made a critical calculation error. They forgot who owned the infrastructure. They were threatening to ban me from a party that I was paying for. It was like a tenant telling the landlord they were evicted. I reached for my lukewarm tea and took a sip. It was bitter, but it cleared my throat. The sadness was still there, a dull ache deep in my chest for the family I wished I had, but it was being rapidly overtaken by the realization of the power I actually held. If I was not coming, then neither was the logic that held their plans together. I looked at the phone again. It was just a piece of glass and metal, but it connected me to my bank account, the airline portal, and the rental agency. I picked it up. The screen woke up, showing the lock screen, a photo of me and my nephews from 2 years ago. I swiped it away. When I unlocked the phone, I wasn't the little sister anymore. I wasn't Auntie Mills who could be bullied into changing diapers. I wasn't the daughter who desperately needed approval. I was the account holder. I was the signatory. I was the person with the $50,000 that they had already mentally spent, and I was about to initiate the greatest recall in family history. I unlocked my phone again. The screen was still glowing with the toxic remnants of the group chat. Madison's words, eats and leaves, sitting there like a fresh stain on a white tablecloth. I did not go back to the chat immediately. Instead, I swiped up and opened my banking application. Face ID scanned my features, my tired eyes, the set of my jaw, and logged me in. I scrolled down to the transaction history for the month of December. It was a long, scrolling list of red numbers. There was the charge for the Timberline Lodge, $7,000 for the deposit, followed by the remaining balance of $18,000. There was the charge for Delta Airlines, $12,400 for 8 flexible, first class and Comfort Plus tickets. There was the private chef service, the dog sledding tour, the SUV rental, the deposit for the Michelin star dinner, the high-end winter gear I had dropped off at Madison's house just days ago. I did the mental math, adding it all up one last time just to be absolutely certain. The total was $53,240. I looked at that number. It represented 6 months of my life. It represented missed sleep, skipped meals, and the kind of stress that makes your hair thin out. It was a down payment on a house. It was a luxury car. It was my freedom, liquid and transferable. And they thought I was the one bringing nothing to the table. I switched back to the messaging app. My fingers were steady. There was no shaking, no hesitation. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon stepping up to the operating table. I typed a single sentence. Cool. Then my $50,000 is not showing up to Christmas either. I hit send. The effect was instantaneous. The little gray bubble appeared at the bottom of the chat. For a moment, nothing happened. The conversation, which had been a flurry of accusations and demands just minutes ago, slammed into a brick wall. I watched the screen. The 3 little dots that indicated someone was typing appeared. It was Madison. Then the dots disappeared. Then my mother started typing. The dots pulsed for 5 seconds, then vanished. Then Madison again. Silence. They were stunned, not because they felt guilty, but because the number was so large that their brains could not immediately compute it. They were trying to figure out if it was a typo. They were trying to figure out if I was lying. I stood up from the sofa and walked to the window. My apartment was on the 14th floor, giving me a view of the Minneapolis skyline blurred by the snow. The flakes were falling in thick, heavy sheets, muting the city lights. It was incredibly quiet in my living room. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic thumping of my own heart, which was beating slow and strong. I imagined the scene in Ohio. I imagined the chaotic noise of Madison's living room suddenly dropping away. I imagined them staring at their phones, looking at each other, trying to parse what $50,000 meant in the context of a sister they viewed as a glorified babysitter. The phone buzzed in my hand. It was Madison. "What are you talking about? 50,000? Don't joke." I stared at the text. It was perfect. It was the final confirmation I needed. She genuinely had no idea. She assumed the cabin was some cheap rental I had found on a discount site. She assumed the flights were economy class tickets purchased with miles. She assumed my contribution was negligible because she viewed me as negligible. She could not conceive of a world where I had the capacity and the generosity to drop 50 grand on them. My mother followed up a second later. Amelia, you could not have possibly paid that much. Do not exaggerate just to make a point. It is unbecoming. Unbecoming. Even now, faced with the potential collapse of their holiday, her instinct was to police my tone. She wanted to believe I was lying because the alternative, that she had just spit in the face of a daughter who was treating her like royalty, was too shameful to accept. I did not reply with words. I did not argue. I was done explaining myself. I switched apps again. I opened the Delta Airlines mobile app. My itinerary was right there on the home screen. Trip to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, 8 passengers. I tapped Manage Trip. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page. There was a big red button that said Cancel Trip. Because I had purchased the most expensive, fully refundable fares, ironically, to accommodate the unpredictable nature of traveling with children, I did not have to jump through hoops. I did not have to call customer service. I tapped the red button. A pop-up appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this itinerary? The total refund amount of $12,400 will be returned to your original payment method. I took a screenshot. Then I confirmed the cancellation. The screen loaded for a second, a spinning wheel of death for their vacation, and then a green checkmark appeared. Trip canceled. I switched back to the group chat and attached the screenshot of the cancellation warning, clearly showing the refund amount. Send. I didn't wait for a reaction. I switched to the email app. I found the confirmation from Timberline Lodge. I clicked the link to manage my reservation. The web page loaded, showing the beautiful photos of the snow-covered cabin, the stone fireplace, the hot tub. It looked cozy. It looked magical. It looked like a place where a family could be happy. I clicked Cancel Booking. Because I was within the cancellation window, by exactly 24 hours, I was entitled to a full refund minus a small administrative fee. Refund amount, $25,000. I took another screenshot. I confirmed the cancellation. The email notification popped up at the top of my screen instantly. Your reservation at Timberline Lodge has been canceled. I went back to the group chat. Madison had not typed anything since the first screenshot. The silence now was different. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was the silence of a bomb squad realizing they had cut the wrong wire. I attached the second screenshot, the one showing the massive refund from the lodge. Send. Then, just to be thorough, I went to the concierge service where I had booked the dog sledding and the private chef. I canceled those too. The amounts were smaller. $2,000 here, $3,000 there, but I screenshotted them all. I sent them in a rapid-fire barrage. Bing, bing, bing. 3 images, 3 nails in the coffin. I watched the chat. For a long minute, there was absolutely no movement. No one breathed. Then, my father's name appeared. Why would you do this? That was his text. Not Amelia, we are sorry. Not, we didn't realize. Not, please, let's talk about this. Why would you do this? The whole family was counting on this trip. He was still doing it. He was still centering their needs. He was still operating under the assumption that they were entitled to my labor and my money, and that withdrawing it was an act of aggression rather than an act of self-defense. He looked at the wreckage of the holiday and saw only what he had lost, not what I had been driven to do. He framed it as a punishment I was inflicting on them, rather than a consequence they had chosen for themselves. I looked at his message, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing for him. No desire to please, no fear of his disapproval. The cord was cut. I typed my final reply. I wanted it to be simple. I wanted it to be a mirror that forced them to look at exactly what they had said to me. I am just doing exactly what you said, I typed. If I am not coming, neither is my money. I hit send. Then, I did something I had never done before. I did not wait for the fallout. I did not wait for the guilt trips, the begging, or the explosions of rage that I knew were coming. I went to the group chat settings. I tapped Mute Notifications. Then I tapped Archive Chat. The conversation vanished from my main screen. The room was silent again. I put the phone down on the windowsill. I looked out at the snow. It was falling harder now, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere in the distance, a plow truck scraped against the asphalt. A harsh, grounding sound. I took a deep breath. My chest felt lighter. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my solar plexus for 32 years had loosened. I had just vaporized $50,000 worth of plans. I had just ruined Christmas for my parents, my sister, and 4 children. By all metrics, I should have been devastated. But as I stood there, watching the snow bury the world below, I realized I wasn't devastated. I was solvent. I had kept the money, but more importantly, I had kept my dignity. I turned away from the window and looked at the pile of wrapped gifts in the corner of the room. I would have to return the robot kit. I would have to return the cashmere sweaters. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, for the first time in forever, I was not wondering what my family needed from me. I was simply wondering what I wanted to have for dinner. The screen of my phone was flashing repeatedly, a strobe light of panic illuminating the dark living room. Although I had archived the chat, the sheer volume of individual messages coming through from Madison, my mother, and my father was bypassing the mute filters I had set up in my head. They were calling. They were texting directly. The collective nervous system of the Wolf family had gone into shock, and the tremors were vibrating across the table. I picked up the phone. I did not do it because I wanted to fight. I did it because I needed to establish the new laws of physics in our universe before they convinced themselves that this was just a glitch they could bully me into fixing. I opened the group chat again. The silence I had created with the screenshots had been broken, replaced by a chaotic stream of denial and accusation. Madison was the loudest. Her messages were arriving in rapid-fire bursts, the capitalization erratic, the desperation palpable. "You are sick," she wrote. "You are actually sick. The twins are crying. Sophie is asking why I look so upset. How am I supposed to explain to them that their Aunt Amelia decided to cancel Christmas because she did not want to help her family? You just destroyed Christmas for 4 innocent children. I hope you are happy." I read the words, and for a split second, the old guilt flared up. It was a conditioned reflex, like a knee jerking when tapped with a rubber mallet. I loved those kids. I loved Sophie's gap-toothed smile and the way the twins tackled me when I walked in the door. The thought of them disappointed made my stomach turn. But then I looked at the logic Madison was using. She was holding the children up as human shields. She was using their innocence to protect her own entitlement. I typed back, my fingers moving calmly. "Do not put this on the kids," I wrote. "I love them. I would do anything for them. But I'm not going to let you use them as leverage to treat me like a servant. This has nothing to do with the children and everything to do with how the 3 adults in this chat view me." My mother chimed in immediately, ignoring my point completely. She pivoted to the argument she had been perfecting since I was 25 years old. "Oh, stop it. Amelia," she texted. "What is the big deal? Truly? You are making a mountain out of a molehill. You are single. You live alone in that apartment. You have more free time than any of us. Madison has 4 children to raise. Your father and I are getting older. Why is it so terrible to ask you to chip in a little more? Why are you being so selfish?" Selfish. The word sat there, heavy and absurd. I had just spent $50,000 on them. I had just spent weeks planning every meal and activity, and in their minds, the act of withdrawing that generosity because I refused to be exploited was selfish. "I do not have more free time," I replied, the anger simmering low and controlled in my chest. "I have a demanding career. I manage a team. My time is just as valuable as yours. The only difference is that I do not use my life choices as an excuse to demand labor from others. I am not freer than you. Mom, I am just the one you have all decided is capable of enduring more disrespect." My father entered the fray then. He was clearly flustered, likely pacing around the kitchen while my mother shouted at her phone. He tried to take command, to play the role of the patriarch restoring order to an unruly subordinate. "Enough," he wrote. "Both of you. This has gone too far. Amelia, stop the drama. Just go back into the app and rebook everything. We will pretend this little tantrum never happened. We will see you at the airport on Friday. Fix it." I actually laughed out loud. It was a short, sharp sound in the empty apartment. He thought this was a technical error. He thought he could just order me to hit undo on a nuclear explosion. He truly believed that if he used his stern voice, I would scramble to repair the damage and thank him for the opportunity to serve again. "No," I typed. "What do you mean, no?" he shot back instantly. "I mean no," I wrote. "I am not rebooking anything. I am not fixing this. If you want to go to the cabin, you are welcome to book it. If you want to fly to Wisconsin, you can buy the tickets. If you think this is no big deal, then you can handle the logistics and the cost yourselves. I am done fixing things for people who tell me I am not welcome unless I work for it." There was a pause, a long, stretching silence that felt different than the one before. This was the silence of reality crashing into delusion. Then, Madison's tone shifted. The aggression drained away, replaced by a sudden, frantic realization of the math involved. "Amelia," she wrote, and for the first time, she didn't sound angry. She sounded scared. "We can't book it. I just looked at the Timberline website. The dates are gone. Someone must have snatched them up the second you canceled. It says sold out for the whole holiday week." I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Of course it was sold out. It was a luxury cabin in peak season. I had secured it months ago. The market did not wait for the Wolf family to learn their lesson. Madison continued, her texts coming slower now. "And I checked the flights. The prices have jumped. It is almost $2,000 a ticket now for the direct route. We can't pay that. You know Mike and I don't have that kind of liquidity. We can't afford this trip without you." There it was, the naked truth. For years, they had pretended that my financial contributions were just nice little extras. They acted like they were doing me a favor by letting me spend my money on them. They treated my carefully planned vacations as if they were owed to them by the universe. But now, stripped of my safety net, they had to admit it. They were broke, or at least, they were not $50,000 vacation rich. They were dependent on me. They needed my money to maintain the lifestyle they felt entitled to, but they refused to treat the source of that money with basic human decency. "I know you can't," I replied. "That is why I paid for it. I was happy to pay for it. I wanted to treat you, but you looked at a $50,000 gift and told me it wasn't enough, unless I also acted as the nanny. You overplayed your hand." My mother, realizing that the command tactic and the guilt tactic had both failed, reverted to her final defense mechanism, emotional invalidation. She could not accept that she was wrong, so she had to prove that I was mentally unstable. "This is exactly why I hate telling you anything," she wrote. "You are so volatile. You always have been. You take one little comment and blow it up into a disaster. You are too sensitive. Amelia, you are too extreme. You are punishing your family because you can't take a joke. You need to grow up." I stared at the words "too sensitive." It was the label they had slapped on me every time I tried to set a boundary. When I cried because Madison broke my toys? Too sensitive. When I asked why Dad missed my graduation? Too sensitive. When I said I was tired after cooking for 12 hours? Too sensitive. It was the gaslighting anthem of my childhood. But tonight, looking at the snow piling up on the window ledge, I didn't feel sensitive. I felt like steel. I felt like a structural column that had finally decided it was tired of holding up a rotting roof. I typed my final response for the night. I wanted to leave them with something they couldn't dismiss as hysteria. "I am not too sensitive," I wrote. "And this is not me being extreme. This is just what happens when the person you rely on decides to stop carrying you. You are not upset because I am sensitive. You are upset because you are so used to me suffering in silence that the sound of me finally speaking up feels like an attack." I hit send. Then I turned off the phone completely. I powered it down. The screen went black, swallowing their panic. their excuses, and their belated realizations. I stood in the quiet of my apartment. The holiday I had built was gone. The money was back in my account. The bridge was burned. But for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't standing on the burning bridge, trying to put it out with my own tears. I was standing on the other side, watching it fall, and realizing that I finally had solid ground beneath my feet. The silence that followed the powering down of my phone was absolute. It was not the empty, lonely silence I had feared for so many years. It was the heavy, settling silence of a building that has finished collapsing. The dust was settling, and for the first time, I could see the skyline. I sat there on the sofa, the adrenaline that had fueled my fingers for the last hour slowly draining out of my system. My hands were no longer shaking, but they felt light, almost numb, like I had been carrying heavy grocery bags for miles and had finally dropped them on the counter. The rage was gone too. In its place was a strange, hollow clarity. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Christmas was over. Not just this Christmas, but the version of Christmas I had been trying to act out for 3 decades. The script had been shredded. The stage had been burned. But I wasn't finished yet. I pulled my laptop toward me. The screen was still glowing with the remnants of my planning. Tabs open for weather forecasts in Wisconsin. A list of dietary restrictions for the kids. A saved search for best hot chocolate recipes. I closed those tabs one by one. Click, click, click. Then I opened my email. There were still loose ends. The major infrastructure, the flights and the cabin, was gone. But the intricate web of extras I had woven to make their lives easier still remained. I found the confirmation for the private chef service I had booked for Christmas Eve. I had sent them a menu that excluded onions for my dad and included a special mac and cheese for the twins. The deposit was non-refundable, but the balance was due in 2 days. I clicked the link, Cancel Service. A moment later, a notification pinged in the corner of my screen. Your request has been processed. Next was the grocery delivery. I had ordered $500 worth of food to be stocked in the cabin before we arrived. Organic milk, fresh fruit, the specific brand of coffee my mother liked. Cancel order. Another ping. I went down the list with the methodical precision of a coroner closing a file. The snowmobile tour, the reservation at the Lakeside Bistro, the rental of the high-end crib and stroller system so Madison wouldn't have to check hers at the airport. With every cancellation, another email arrived in my inbox. Refund processed, booking voided, reservation canceled. They came in a steady stream, a quiet digital cascade. To anyone else, it might have looked like a loss, but to me, each email felt like a knot being untied. For years, I had bound myself to them with these cords of service. I had tied myself to their happiness, their comfort, and their approval. I thought these ropes were safety lines keeping me connected to the family. Now, I realized they were just leashes. And I was cutting them, one by one. When the inbox finally stopped pinging, I closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. I looked tired. Yes, but I didn't look broken. I stood up and walked over to the open suitcases near the door. They were gaping maws, stuffed with the physical evidence of my devotion. I reached in and pulled out a thick, cream-colored cable-knit sweater. I had bought it specifically for the trip, imagining how I would look wearing it while I toasted marshmallows with my nephews. I had imagined the photo we would take, the one Madison would post on social media with a caption like, "Family First." I folded the sweater. The wool was soft under my fingers. I walked to my closet and placed it on the high shelf. Then I went back for the snow boots, the thermal leggings, the heavy parka. I unpacked the entire trip. It was a slow, deliberate process. Every item I took out of the suitcase was a small reclamation of my identity. I wasn't Aunt Amelia, the provider, anymore. I was just Amelia. I was a woman who lived in Minneapolis. I was a woman who liked quiet evenings and order. I was a woman who did not have to spend her holidays managing the emotional volatility of 3 other adults. As I placed a stack of books back on my nightstand, a thought tried to creep in. It was the old voice, the one my mother had installed in my head when I was 6. "You can still fix this," the voice whispered. "If you call the airline right now, maybe you can get the tickets back. If you call the lodge, maybe they haven't relisted it yet. You can apologize. You can say you had a moment of madness. You can save Christmas." I paused, holding a pair of wool socks. I looked that thought in the face, and I dismantled it. If I fixed this, if I scrambled to undo the damage I had caused, I would be teaching them a lesson. But it would be the wrong one. I would be teaching them that my boundaries were permeable. I would be teaching them that if they pushed me hard enough, or guilted me effectively enough, I would eventually fold. I would be proving that my no was actually just a "convince me." If I went back now, they would never believe a word I said ever again. They would know, forever, that they owned me. No, I put the socks in the drawer and slid it shut. The only way for them to understand that I was a person was for them to feel the void where I used to be. They had to feel the weight of the burden I had dropped, because they were the ones who would have to pick it up. I checked my phone one last time before going to the kitchen. I didn't unlock it, just tapped the screen to see the notifications. The group chat was silent. There were no apologies. There were no, "We love you, please come home." There were just previews of individual messages from my father. "You are making a mistake. This is excessive. Call me." They were still trying to manage me. They were still trying to correct the employee who had gone rogue. They were not mourning my absence. They were mourning the loss of their logistics manager. I turned the phone over and left it on the counter. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. Not for my mother, not for Madison, for me. I sat by the window, watching the snow bury the city. It was beautiful, it was peaceful, and it was incredibly lonely. I needed to hear a human voice, but not theirs. I reached for the landline I kept for work emergencies, a number my family didn't call because they couldn't text it. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Hello?" The voice was warm, groggy. It was Lena. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded steady, surprisingly normal. "It is me." "Amelia?" Lena's tone shifted instantly, sharpening with concern. "Is everything okay? I thought you were packing. Shouldn't you be asleep for the flight tomorrow?" I took a sip of tea. "There is no flight. Lena, I canceled it." There was a pause on the other end. Lena was my best friend. She knew everything. She knew about the village of Amelia. She knew about the ungrateful comments, the babysitting demands, the years of feeling like an outsider in my own bloodline. She was the one who had told me, gently, over wine last month, that I was buying their love with that cabin. "You canceled it?" she repeated, a note of awe in her voice. "Like, all of it?" "All of it," I said. "The cabin, the flights, the food, the $50,000, it is all gone." "Oh my God," Lena breathed. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. She knew. She just asked. "How do you feel?" I searched for the word. "I feel like I just quit a job I hated, but I am a little scared about being unemployed." "You are not unemployed," Lena said firmly. "You are just freelance now." I chuckled. It was a weak sound, but it was real. "So," I said, looking at the reflection of my empty apartment in the dark window, "I am currently sitting in my living room with a lot of unpacked suitcases and absolutely no plans for the next 4 days. I think I'm going to order Chinese food and watch bad movies." "No, you are not," Lena said immediately. "You are coming here." "Lena." "No," I started. "I don't want to intrude. Your parents' house is always packed, and—" "Stop," she cut me off. "My parents love you. My mom has been asking if you were stopping by. We are doing the usual, ugly sweaters, too much mashed potatoes, and my dad falling asleep during Elf. We have the guest room set up, the one with the floral wallpaper you hate." I closed my eyes. I could picture Lena's parents' house. It was a cluttered, rambling 2-story in the suburbs. It didn't have a view of a frozen lake. It didn't have a private chef, but it had Lena's mom, who always hugged me like she meant it. It had Lena's dad, who asked me about my job and actually listened to the answer. Are you sure? I asked. I don't want to be the sad stray you dragged in from the cold. You are not a stray, Lena said softly. You are family, the kind you choose. Just get in your car tomorrow, or tonight. If the roads are okay, we have plenty of wine. Tears pricked my eyes then, hot and sudden. My own mother hadn't asked if I was okay. My own sister hadn't asked where I would go. But Lena, who owed me nothing, was opening the door without a second thought. Okay, I whispered. I will come tomorrow morning. Good, Lena said. Bring the peppermint bark. I know you made it. We hung up. I sat there for a long time, holding the receiver. I thought about the Timberline Lodge. It would sit empty this week, or maybe some lucky family had snatched it up at the last minute. I thought about my parents, sitting in their living room in Ohio, surrounded by the wreckage of their expectations, probably eating leftovers and complaining about how I had ruined everything. I felt a pang of phantom pain, the ghost of the limb I had just severed. It hurt to know that they would spend Christmas angry at me. It hurt to know that I was the villain in their story tonight. But then I thought about tomorrow. I thought about driving to Lena's house. I thought about walking through the door and being handed a glass of wine, not a diaper. I thought about sitting on their couch and not being asked to serve, or fix, or pay. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter. I picked up the tray of peppermint bark I had baked for Madison's kids. I wrapped it carefully in foil. Then I went to my desk and pulled out a notebook. I wanted to write it down. I wanted to memorialize this feeling so I would never forget why I did it. I wrote the date, and then I wrote a single sentence. I did not just cancel a trip. I just resigned from a role I never signed a contract for. I closed the book. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going home for Christmas. I was going somewhere better. I was going where I was wanted. The morning of the 25th of December arrived not with a scream, but with the smell of cinnamon and toasted pecans. For the last decade, my Christmas mornings had begun at 6 o'clock sharp, usually with a toddler jumping on my stomach or my mother banging pots in the kitchen, shouting that the turkey needed to be basted. I was conditioned to wake up with my heart rate already elevated, my mental checklist scrolling before I even opened my eyes. But this morning, I woke up slowly. I was lying on the deep, plush sofa in Lena's living room, buried under a heavy quilt that smelled like lavender detergent. The house was not silent, but the noise was different. It was a soft, ambient layer of sound, the clinking of silverware against ceramic, the low hum of jazz music playing from a speaker, and the gentle, rhythmic laughter of people who were actually enjoying each other's company. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the panic to set in. I waited for the guilt to crush my chest. I waited for the phantom vibration of my phone demanding to know where the diapers were. But there was nothing, just the sunlight reflecting off the snow outside and casting long, pale beams across the rug. I sat up, pushing the quilt aside. My phone was on the coffee table, still powered down. I had not turned it on since I arrived the night before. "She lives!" Lena's voice called out from the kitchen. I walked into the open-concept dining area. Lena, her parents, and her younger brother were already gathered around the island. There were piles of waffles, a jug of orange juice, and a station set up for making hot chocolate. "Merry Christmas, Amelia," Lena's mom said, beaming. She was a short, round woman with kind eyes who was wearing a ridiculous apron that said, "Santa's favorite baker." She didn't ask me to grab a plate. She didn't tell me the trash needed to be taken out. She simply handed me a mug of coffee, perfectly light and sweet, just the way I liked it. "Merry Christmas," I said, my voice thick with sleep. "Can I help with anything? Do you need me to wash those pans?" Lena's dad laughed, waving a fork at me. "Sit down. Amelia, it is Christmas. The only thing you need to do is decide if you want whipped cream on your waffles." I sat. It felt foreign, almost illicit, to be sitting while others were standing, to be served instead of serving. Later that morning, Lena's sister arrived with her 2 children, a boy of 5 and a girl of 7. When they burst through the door, my muscle memory kicked in. I instinctively braced myself to be the designated coat taker, the distraction, the secondary parent. But the kids ran past me to hug their grandparents. Then they settled on the floor to open their stockings. An hour later, we were all sitting in the living room playing a board game. The 7-year-old, Maya, came over and squeezed onto the cushion next to me. "Auntie Amelia," she said. She called me that even though we were not related. "Can you help me read this card? The words are too big." I felt a pang in my chest, a sharp ache for Sophie and the twins back in Ohio. I wondered if anyone was helping them read their cards. I wondered if anyone was sitting on the floor with them, or if the adults were too busy mourning the vacation they didn't get. "Sure," I said, smiling at Maya. "Let's see." We played for an hour. At one point, Maya got bored and wandered off to the kitchen. Her mother didn't say, "Amelia, go watch her." She just got up and followed her child herself. It was such a small thing, a mother parenting her own child. But to me, it felt like I was witnessing a revolution. I realized then that in this house, I was not a utility. The children liked me because I was kind to them, not because I was the only one paying attention. The adults spoke to me because they found me interesting, not because they needed something fixed. After lunch, Lena pulled me aside. We sat on the window seat, watching the snow fall. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. "Lena, you didn't have to," I said. "I didn't bring you anything." "You brought yourself," she said. "Open it." I tore the paper. Inside was a notebook. It wasn't expensive leather or a high-tech gadget. It was a simple, soft-cover journal with thick, cream-colored pages. The cover was a deep forest green. I opened to the first page. In Lena's sprawling, messy handwriting, she had written an inscription. "For the life you get to choose." I stared at the words. I traced the ink with my thumb. "I figured," Lena said softly, "that since you just cleared the slate, you might need somewhere to write the new script." I looked up at her, and my vision blurred. I didn't cry, but the gratitude swelled in my throat, making it hard to speak. It was the perfect gift. It was an acknowledgement that my life was mine again. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't get sappy on me," she bumped my shoulder. "But seriously, you look lighter. You look like you actually slept." "I did," I admitted. "But I do wonder." "About them?" I nodded. "I can't help it. I keep picturing the twins. They probably woke up expecting to go to the airport. They probably have their little suitcases packed." "That is not on you," Lena said firmly. "That is on the people who promised them a trip they couldn't afford and then treated the financier like garbage." "I know," I said, "but knowing it and feeling it are two different things." Curiosity, that dangerous itch, finally got the better of me. I didn't turn on my main phone, but I had my iPad in my bag. I opened it and logged into my secondary messaging app. I had a message from my cousin Sarah. Sarah was on my father's side, a woman who generally kept to herself and had always been treated as a bit of an outsider because she didn't play the family politics game. "Hey," the message read, "I know you are probably offline, and good for you, but I thought you should know the gossip." I hesitated, then typed back, "Tell me." Sarah's reply came instantly. "It is a mess over here. Your dad called my dad this morning asking for a loan. Apparently, they tried to rebook a last-minute trip to a cheaper resort in Michigan because they couldn't face the embarrassment of staying home after bragging to everyone about the luxury cabin. But everything is booked solid or triple the price." I read the words, feeling a cold vindication. They were scrambling. They were trying to save face. "My dad told him no," Sarah continued. "And honestly, the group chat with the aunts is wild. Aunt Patty is saying you are heartless and ruined Christmas. But Uncle Ben? He actually said, well, if you kick the donkey enough times, eventually it stops walking. I think a lot of people are realizing just how much of the heavy lifting you were doing. The system collapsed the second you stepped out." I put the iPad down. The system collapsed. That was it. That was what I needed to know. I wasn't looking for them to suffer. I wasn't hoping they were miserable. I just needed to know that my absence mattered. I needed to know that I wasn't crazy for thinking I did everything. Because the moment I stopped, nothing happened. the magic of their Christmas wasn't magic at all. It was just my labor, invisible and unappreciated until it was gone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the urge to text them, "I told you so." I just felt a quiet, settling peace. I had removed the cornerstone, and the building had fallen. It was tragic, yes, but it proved that I was the cornerstone. In the late afternoon, the snow stopped, leaving a fresh white blanket over the world. Lena's friends came over, a group of 3 women I had met a few times. They were loud, funny, and carrying thermoses of spiked hot cocoa. "We are going for a walk to the park," one of them said. "Coming?" "Definitely," I said. We bundled up. I put on the heavy parka I had unpacked from my suitcase the night before. We walked out into the cold, crisp air, our boots crunching on the ice. We walked for miles. We talked about work, about movies, about dating. We laughed at stupid jokes. At one point, we passed a playground. A toddler had fallen off a low swing and was crying. The mother, a stranger, rushed over to pick him up. In my old life, my sister would have looked at me and said, "Amelia, go see if he is okay." Even if the child wasn't ours, it was a reflex to make me the caretaker of the world. But here, nobody looked at me. Nobody expected me to solve the problem. I was just a woman standing in the snow, drinking cocoa, enjoying the sunset painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing air. It tasted clean. For the first time in 32 years, I was not hungry at Christmas. I was not tired. I was not resentful. I was simply present. When we got back to the house, the sun had gone down. The windows of Lena's house were glowing with yellow light, warm and inviting. I stopped on the porch for a moment while the others went inside. I brushed the snow off the railing and looked out at the street. I thought about the $50,000 sitting safely in my bank account. I thought about the text from Sarah. I thought about my father begging for a loan. I knew that when I eventually turned my phone back on, there would be a storm waiting for me. I knew that relationships had been fractured, perhaps permanently. I knew that I would be the villain in their version of this story for the rest of their lives. But as I stood there, listening to the laughter spilling out from inside the house, a house where I was welcome just as I was, I realized something. I had destroyed the perfect family Christmas. I had burned the fantasy to the ground. But in the ashes, I had found myself. "Amelia, you coming?" Lena called from the doorway. "Yeah," I said, turning away from the dark street. "I am coming." I walked inside and closed the door against the cold. If losing them was the price of finding this feeling, then it was a bargain I would make 1,000 times over. It was the 3rd Tuesday in January, and the sky over Minneapolis was the color of a bruised plum. I was sitting at my desk at Brightline Nexus, surrounded by the comforting hum of climate-controlled server towers and the soft clatter of mechanical keyboards. My life had returned to its default settings. The spreadsheets I was looking at now were for data migration, not holiday logistics. The only people demanding my attention were project managers who respected my expertise and paid me a salary to solve their problems. The silence between me and my family had lasted exactly 24 days. It was a heavy, dense silence, but I had learned to carry it. I had spent Christmas at Lena's house, New Year's Eve watching fireworks from my own balcony with a glass of champagne I bought for myself, and the first weeks of January focusing on a new software rollout. I had not blocked them, but I had not reached out either. I was waiting to see if the silence would break from the weight of their realization, or if it would harden into a permanent wall. At 2 p.m, my phone vibrated against the mahogany surface of my desk. It was not the rapid-fire buzzing of a group chat panic. It was a single, hesitant vibration. I looked at the screen. The name Madison appeared in white letters against the dark background. My heart did a strange little flip, not of fear, but of recognition. It was the feeling you get when you see a storm cloud on the horizon and know you have to decide whether to close the windows or go outside and face the rain. I picked up the phone. There were no exclamation points. There was no all-caps screaming. There were no guilt-tripping emojis. It was just 2 sentences. If you want to come back next year, I will not make you watch the kids. I am sorry. I read it once, then I read it again. It was the first time in my adult life that Madison had typed the words, I am sorry, without following them with a but. Usually, it was, I am sorry you feel that way, or I am sorry, but you are being dramatic. This was different. It was bare. It was stripped of the defensive armor she usually wore. But as I stared at the screen, I realized something else. It was also a negotiation. She was offering me a deal. She had looked at the balance sheet of our relationship, realized that the cost of losing me was higher than the benefit of my free labor, and she was adjusting her terms. I will not make you watch the kids. It was a concession, yes, but it still implied that the power dynamics existed, just that she was willing to suspend one specific rule to get me back in the fold. A moment later, a second message arrived. This one was from my mother. It was sent individually, not in the group chat. This year was very hard without you. We just want everyone to be together. Please think about it. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the leather creaking softly. Together. That word had always been their trump card. Family is about being together, but as I looked at the snow falling outside my office window, I replayed the tape of what together actually looked like for the last 20 years. Together meant me in the kitchen while they watched football. Together meant me sleeping on the air mattress so the kids could have the beds. Together meant I was the friction that kept their machine running smoothly, the one who absorbed the heat so they didn't have to burn. My mother didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she was wrong. She just said it was hard, and she wanted togetherness. She wanted the comfort of the old system back. She missed the daughter who fixed things, not necessarily the woman who was sitting here in this office. This was the moment. This was the climax of the entire war I had waged with that one text message on a Tuesday night in December. I could accept the apology. I could text back. Okay, let us try again next year. If I did that, I would get to see my nephews. I would get to have Christmas dinner with my parents. I would be the good daughter again, and Madison would probably keep her word. She wouldn't ask me to babysit. But the eyes looking at me would be the same. They would still see me as the one who had to be bargained with. They would see my presence as something they had purchased with a concession, rather than something they cherished simply because I existed. I asked myself a terrifying question. If next year is exactly the same jokes, same dismissiveness, same lack of interest in my life, but I just do not have to change diapers, do I want to go? The answer rose up in my throat, clear and sharp. No. The issue was never really the 4 kids. I loved the kids. The issue was that they thought I was a resource to be mined. They thought my value was quantifiable by what I provided. Madison's text proved she still didn't quite get it. She thought the problem was the task. She didn't understand that the problem was the disrespect. She was trying to fix a structural failure with a coat of paint. I sat there for 10 minutes. My team was waiting for an update on the migration. But this was more important. I was rewriting the code of my own life. I needed to send a reply that didn't close the door, but didn't walk through it either. I needed to tell them that the price of admission to my life wasn't just less work, it was more respect. I typed slowly, feeling the weight of every character. I appreciate the apology. Madison, I wrote. But I need time. The issue was not just the babysitting. It was feeling like my only role in this family was to serve everyone else. If a day comes when you want to see me as a sister and not a service provider, we can try again. But we need to change the way we talk to each other, not just the list of chores you assign me. I sent it. Then I replied to my mother. I know it was hard. It was hard for me too. But together only works if everyone is standing on equal ground. I am not ready to come back to the way things were. I need space to figure out what a healthy version of this family looks like for me. I hit send. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew there would be confusion on their end. They would probably tell each other I was being difficult again. They might say I was holding a grudge. But I wasn't holding a grudge. I was holding a standard. I put the phone down, face down on the desk. I opened the top drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside, tucked away next to my passport, was the forest green notebook Lena had given me on Christmas morning. I hadn't written in it yet. I had been too afraid to mar the crisp white pages with the messy, complicated feelings of the last few weeks. But now, I was ready. I took out a black pen. I opened the cover, running my hand over Lena's inscription, "For the life you get to choose." I turned to the first blank page. The paper was smooth under my hand. I didn't write a list of resolutions. I didn't write a rant about my childhood. I wrote a receipt for the transaction I had finally closed. The first year I chose myself, I wrote, my handwriting strong and legible. Christmas did not have a cabin by the frozen lake. It did not have a 5-course meal or a $50,000 price tag. It had silence. It had a sofa in a friend's house. It had a walk in the snow. I paused, looking at the ink drying on the page. But it had one thing new, I continued. I am no longer the only one paying the price to be called family. I closed the book. I put the pen down. I looked out the window one last time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the snowy city streets. I had work to do. I had a team to lead. I had a dinner reservation with Lena tonight at a Thai place we both loved. My phone remained silent on the desk. Maybe they were typing. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they were finally, truly thinking. It didn't matter. The notification light could blink all it wanted. I was no longer on call. Thank you so much for listening to this story. This was a journey about boundaries, self-respect, and the hard choices we sometimes have to make to find our own peace. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from the United States, from somewhere in Europe, or maybe right here in Asia? Please leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on Amelia's decision. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more realistic dramas about justice and family dynamics, please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and see you in the next video.